1010 WOLB Baltimore and WERQ FM. HD3 Baltimore.
The views and opinions of the guest and host you hear are not necessarily those of the staff and management of Radio 1, its sponsors, or advertisers.
Welcome to the Our Legacy Matters show, where we'll discuss how to secure, maintain, and transfer wealth to future generations. I am your host, Attorney Sherry Fleming. Now let's tune in. Good morning, everyone, and welcome and thank you for joining the Our Legacy Matters show yet again. I am your host, Sherry Fleming. While I am a Maryland attorney, I'm not your attorney, so anything that you hear on this show that prompts you to want to know more information, you can go to my website, sherryfleming.com, and or seek professional help tailored towards yourself. Today, we are discussing intellectual property and estate planning. And I have my best sister friend, Attorney Tiana Mann, sitting in because she is our resident expert for today. And so, Tiana, introduce yourself to the people.
Good morning. First of all, friend, I'm so proud of you. Can we give a round of applause in Radio Land? That's so old school, right? Radio Land. Yes, come on, production. Yes, we're so proud of Attorney Sherry Fleming and all that you're doing for the community. Again, my name is Tiana Mann. I am an intellectual property attorney, and we'll talk more about what intellectual property is a little bit later in the show. But basically, I use trademark and copyright law and contracts to help people do business better and to protect what I call their creative capital, the things that they create in their individual lives and their businesses. So that can be anything from song lyrics and the poem that you wrote for your boo to the brand name that you have for your business, product names, things of that nature. So at this point in my career, I'm not only an attorney, but I've ended up doing some brand strategy and consulting in that way. So basically, if I can do it and I love it and I see you have a passion for it as well, I'm going to figure out a way to help you protect what you've created.
That's my friend. She's so smart.
Thank you, friend.
And so some of you may be asking, why are we discussing this with estate planning? And yes, I haven't got my voice back fully. I'm still a little bit sick. But we're discussing this concept with estate planning to really introduce the topic of and really introduce the concept that they actually go together. So estate planning is the concept of protecting both your income and assets and then preparing those income and assets to be transferred to future generations. And I think that we often forget the conversation about creativity and how to protect and pass creativity. And so, Tiana, what is intellectual property?
So to make intellectual property really easy, you can think about it as creations of the mind. I think that in a really large sense. Now, don't go to court talking about creations of the mind, but we're not in court right now. We're having a family conversation. So intellectual property on the legal side, or if you're thinking about what areas of law intellectual property covers, it's going to cover things like patent law, trademark law, copyright law, as well as trade secret. And we don't talk about trade secret as much, I don't think, in the common conversation among people, but trade secret is actually a very powerful tool for protecting the creations of the mind. Again, that might be personal to you, or that might be under the business or the effort that you started. So that's the overall definition of intellectual property. And in all cases, I want to just say this, you cannot protect an idea. That is something that's really important to bring up here. You can have an idea, but it doesn't become intellectual property that could possibly be protected until you produce something. So I always say you can't protect what you don't produce. An idea can't be protected, but once you make it into something, we can start the conversation about how to protect it.
You can protect what you don't produce.
Honey,
that's
a word for
the
life,
masses.
okay?
And so you've mentioned patents, you've mentioned trademarks, you've mentioned copyrights, you've mentioned trade secrets,
Yes.
And these are the protections. But can you give us an example of each so
Yes.
that our listeners know what they could potentially protect?
Absolutely. And let me just give a disclaimer here. I speak in disclaimers. I'm an attorney. You already know this, Sherry. I always hope that something is protectable, but we are in our profession governed by what the law says. And so with these situations, if you think that you have something protectable, it's always helpful to get a professional understanding of whether it can be protected with the law that we have right now. So let's talk about patent. In general, patent covers designs and formulas, everything from the design of Jordan tennis shoes and the technology that Nike uses for Air Max, things of that nature, down to the formula for prescription drugs. All of these things really that you find a lot of the STEM careers associated with, those are the things that are protected by patent law. So think a bit, again, about formulas for certain products. Again, you think about aspirin or think about your diabetes medication. And then designs. It can be a design of a car. It could be the design of a shoe. It could be the design of the microphone that I'm speaking into, but it's something that will give protection for a limited amount of time for the manufacturer or the creator of that item or process or system. And it's really more technical and scientific. If we move on to trademark is a design, a logo, a word, or slogan. It can be a mix of those things also that's used to distinguish and to kind of articulate the source of a good or service. And so if you think about great value at Walmart, we know if we see great value, it did not come from Target. It didn't even come from Sam's, even though Sam's is related to the Walmart company. When you see Chanel, you know that Chanel is not Louis Vuitton and Louis Vuitton is not Fendi or Gucci. It distinguishes that brand in the market, the goods or the services. You know that Red Door Spa is not the Hand and Stone massage place, if you will. And so trademark really is about what a lot of people call branding and distinguishing one thing, one good or service from another. When we go to copyright, now we're talking about works of authorship. Basically, I made that. It could be, again, lyrics to the song by Case and Joe. It could be this, it could be architectural drawings that you do for work, or maybe you have your own independent firm. It could be a manuscript for a book. There are lots of different works of authorship. And now with the technology that's in place and the internet is so common, of course, it's everywhere. We have different ways of publishing and distributing. So copyright law can be very interesting and very involved. And when we get to trade secret is something that's a little bit different. And I want to talk about it in terms of food. So I always think about Kentucky Fried Chicken. We know it doesn't matter how many commercials we've seen.
Are they KFC or Kentucky Fried Chicken?
I'm sorry. Did I date myself? Okay,
did.
KFC.
I think they're back to Kentucky Fried Chicken.
I don't know, but I know it's a Colonel, and it started off as Kentucky Fried Chicken. But KFC, we know that there are 11 herbs and spices, but nobody knows the actual recipe. KFC is not giving that up ever. That is a trade secret. They make sure that recipe, and this is also a good example with Coca-Cola, that recipe is never, everybody doesn't have it at one time. Nobody knows it. They go through painstaking effort to make sure that no one ever knows the whole thing at one time. And the reason for that is because when you have a trade secret, there are certain requirements for it, but it gives them a specific advantage in the market. Everybody knows how KFC original recipe tastes. I know when the texture was different, and it made it different from Popeyes or Roy Rogers or whatever else was out at the time.
I don't know where Roy Rogers is.
West Virginia. I've been there. West Virginia. That's where Roy Rogers is. So trade secret I think it is a really good secret weapon. If you're able to use trade secret, it's something that's really good because sometimes people strategize and they don't want to use patent, trademark, or copyright as their strategies because they're all public. When you submit an application for patent, for trademark, or for copyright, you submit an application to the federal government. And everybody can see it. Everybody can see your whole process. And if there's something that you need to keep confidential, if your auntie's sweet potato pie recipe is something that you don't want anybody to know, trade secret might be something that you consider instead of some of the other potential options that there could be.
Okay, so something for the everyday business owner, the everyday entrepreneur. One of the last shows I talked about my braider, and my hair's braided again. She did a wonderful work.
It's
and
officially
I think about
summer.
It's officially summer. And I think about her client list. I think about my client list.
Yes.
Our client list. I think as attorneys, we have a different code of ethics to make sure that we keep those lists secure,
right,
because we can't share that information. But for my braider or for my nail tech, would their process, would their client list, where would those things fall?
So for a client list, I would probably analyze more to ask a little bit more questions to consider a trade secret, honestly, because of course we wouldn't want the client list to have to be sent into any federal entity as a specimen and everybody can see it. That would probably be the only potential protection that I would think of in that situation, because client lists can provide an economic advantage to a particular business. Think about, let's say, an entertainment agency that is putting, advertising for athletes, and their whole list is people from all of the different NFL teams. That's incredibly valuable, and that can be protected potentially. But when you talk about, the everyday entrepreneur, I'll say this. A lot of people, when they're starting their businesses or starting their brands, they don't think that trademark pertains to them, or they're like, I can do it later. Or they may say things like, I have the domain, I have the social media handle, I should be protected. Just because you have the domain doesn't mean that you have the trademark. The domain distributor and the United States Patent and Trademark Office do not have a monthly meeting to compare records. They're not talking to each other. They don't care if you have the domain. And so it's really, really helpful to be thinking about trademark for your business name. You can be thinking even about your product name. So maybe I'm hungry. Let's take an example with Burger King. We have Burger King, and that's trademark. That's the business name. But you also have the Whopper. And so you'll never get a Whopper at Wendy's. You'll never get a Whopper at McDonald's. And so that's a product name that is something very unique to their brand, and they have that trademarked as well. And so for the regular entrepreneur, I'm a huge advocate, particularly for African Americans and women-owned businesses. We have to start thinking like founders, not just CEOs, because you can get a CEO position and that can be taken away. You have to think like a founder. Like, I was given this seed, I put it in the ground, I chose the ground to put it in. How do I nurture this? Trademark protection, for example, copyright protection, patent, these are protections for your seed. And you protect the seed before it is a tree. You don't just start protecting when you start seeing things to sprout above the ground. So I think that it's something that we have to start thinking about at our initial stages. And because it's valuable, or because sometimes we don't see the value, we don't think that we should be thinking of it so early. But I'm going to tell you right now, every idea that you have, every institution that you want to start, every mentoring program that you're thinking of initiating has value. And it is enough value to be assessed to see if you can protect it fully. So I know I'm saying a lot and I'm everywhere. I get very nerdy and excited about this topic. But the everyday entrepreneur, the everyday author needs to be thinking not that this can't be protected, but is there something that should be protected? And if so, I need to find it, because you might not even be able to see the incredibly valuable parts of your business and brand.
My friend is really, really smart. I'm sitting here just looking in awe, looking at every word that passed out of her mouth.
Don't make me blush, friend. They will be able to hear it now.
And so that conversation of value is one that I want to shift to, because in the very technical world of estate planning, that is what we're doing. Right. We are assigning value to things. That value could be a monetary value. It could be a sentimental value, but we're assigning value to things when we say, this is what I have, this is what I own, this is what I control, and this is what I want to pass, and these are the people to whom I want to pass it to. So how is value determined with intellectual property?
Okay. So on the technical side, or if you want to go mathematical,
let's do a little technical first. Okay. I don't want to lose the folks.
No, I understand. I mean, it's very easy. There are accounting firms that will come in and say, hey, you have what? let me do a value, do an evaluation to see what it is and translate that into numbers. You're going to see that a lot with companies like Apple or Amazon, because when they look at their annual value and their profits and losses and things like that, they also are looking at their intellectual property and how much that is worth. Something to consider, I think, something that you said that's really interesting is that, ownership, property, and control, those are things that are hard to put numbers on, but they're valuable in and of themselves. So for the everyday entrepreneur that is not Amazon, you might be thinking, well, I don't have enough for some accounting company to come in here and, pay the big people to make an Excel sheet about what I have. But when you own something, you own the story of it. And for Black people in particular, we're living in a time where people are debating on whether our truth should be shared. I think it is incredibly important for us to be able to own something so we can preserve the accurate story of it. I don't know what number that is, but when you can tell somebody, no, that's not the story, and I know because I own it, that's a power. I really can't articulate how great it is to have that. And it's not just great, it is remarkable to have, especially for historical purposes. And if I can tell the story and own it, I can tell the story to my children and they can own it and they can share it. And just in that way, in owning the story, you've preserved history for yourself and your community. I can't give you a number for that, but I do believe that it is worth preserving, because when we sell our brands to larger companies, which sometimes is the best strategy at the time, I'm not against it. We also give away, sometimes if you don't negotiate for it, you give away the right to the story. And that can be very unfortunate. When we have a product that was made in somebody's kitchen, that's fine. Sell it to L'Oreal if you want to. That $20, $30, $40, $50 million can circulate in the community, and that might be valuable. But who holds the story? Who gets to say where this came from and that this was cocoa butter and lard and love put together and put on your hair, on your scalp, and now your hair grows? And for me, at this point in my life, I think that is what I really want to press into people, is that you're not just preserving the ability to have control on how this asset is used. You get to impact history and make sure that it's correct. You get to say, I was given this divine inspiration, and I get to make sure that I convey it correctly for history's sake. And so, again, I realize that a part of my practice is not just filling out the forms, but helping people to discover this value in what they've been given to do in their purpose. That the name for your mentoring group or your group home could be something that is so incredibly distinct, and something that we need to make sure it's preserved so that nobody takes the history of it and warps it later. And so on one end, you do have people that can put numbers on it. You definitely can. But on the other side of it, we need to also, I personally believe that we need to preserve the story of what it is that we have been blessed to create. And when we can do that, we can make sure that our history is accurate for future generations.
Go ahead. And so for estate planning purposes, I know with my clients who own businesses, most of my clients don't even know what intellectual property is until they come to me, and I see that they own a business, or maybe they don't even know that they own a business.
Right.
And I'm like, hey, you do know that you're in business. You're making money off of this this service. And so we then have the conversation about intellectual property, and we have the conversation similar to everything you just said about value. And so everything can be valued. There are, and if you are in business, you should have an accountant or a bookkeeper, someone other than yourself that's helping you carry the ones in your business. For the younger people, they don't carry ones anymore. I don't know what they do.
One is about to not exist in a minute.
But you should have some professional, and that professional, if they're qualified, they should be able to do evaluation of your business and the assets within your business. I went to a training where if they can value assets in the metaverse, which are worth millions at this point.
And you can't touch it. People have been moving into the metaverse for over a year.
They can value assets in the metaverse at this point. They can put a value on Big Mama's sweet potato recipe that y'all been selling for the past 10 years.
Absolutely. And they can project how much it's going to be if you make a different business move with that.
And the they we are talking about is actual professional valuation experts. I don't want to call them accountants. They may have that background, but not always. And so if you need more information about that, contact me via email or call our office and I can let you know. And so we've had a conversation about what intellectual property is, how do you protect it, how do you value it, and so how do you pass it? So we've been discussing, the tools of a trust, a last will and testament. We've discussed powers of attorney for financial matters, and these are the technical things. But what can you weigh in on how to truly make sure that we pass intellectual property to future generations?
Sure. So this is something that, intellectual property is very similar to real property, but it just comes from your mind. Real property comes from the dirt or from something that you build on top of the dirt. Intellectual property, comes from your mind. So it's these assets that your mind can create. And you pass it through a will. That is one of the most convenient ways to do it. But with that, for instance, with copyright, let's say that you inherit, or someone passes away and you inherit a book of poetry that they have. One of the things, it would be great, let's say that, you have it in the will and it's passed that way. But you want to have some place on record where there's a transfer of the copyright from the deceased person to the person that inherited it. So honestly, you can use wills in the same way. And like we've talked about, or you've talked about before on the show, about having these difficult conversations about what happens when someone passes away. Where do my journals go? Where do my T-shirts go? Where do my bamboo earrings go? In that conversation, you have a talk about what happens with my creations. I'm a journalist in my background, and my initial background is journalism. There are about 4 or 5 of my journalism friends that know if I should choose to go on ahead to heaven before everybody else goes, get her journals and burn them. Nobody will be publishing them. I've had that conversation already.
Not burn them.
Burn them. There will be no, after she died, no, you didn't. No, you did not. You stole it. Okay. And Jesus is going to get you for it. But I've had that conversation because I know certain content that was in certain journals, I don't want it published. But if it's something that you've created and you're thinking about how can this potentially help my family, or how could this be intellectual property that feeds my family when I'm gone, you do want to have this conversation with your estates and trusts attorney to see what you need to do. Now, here's the thing. I am always an advocate for registration. That is the top way, the best way to ensure you have the fullest amount of options when it comes to protecting your works. So again, let's go back to that poetry book. If I'm saying, I'm ill and I know that the end is coming soon for me, I might encourage my children or grandchildren to go get my book. We need to have this copyrighted, put it into my name, and I will, before the end gets really, really close, transfer the copyright to you so that we have a clean chain of title. And it's clear. I had this was mine, it was my copyright, and now I'm handing it off to this person. Of course, we know that life does what it wants to, and there can be a lot of complexities, but you're really going to pass intellectual property in many of the same ways that you would pass physical property. But you need to have these conversations because the ownership, the chain of title is very, very important.
Yeah. So for clarity's sake, you can list intellectual property content in your will. You can put it in trust as well. I've represented, ironically, a number of artists. I didn't, and this is where this conversation came up initially. I've represented a number of artists that engage in creative work, actual physical, like canvases, oil painting, digital graphics, photographers,
for sure.
That, all create things. And what always comes up in the representation is the conversation of value. And I encourage them to get a current date valuation. And they're like, well, I'm an artist and I'm sensitive about my stuff, but get a valuation of it. So we at least have a starting point. Right. And what I often find and what I often tell them, because that valuation is also something that can be referenced in estate planning documents to add validity to the existence of the work in the ownership by the producer, the founder. And so what ultimately ends up coming up, and this is where I want to leave off a little bit, is that I find that the business owner, the creator, they have sentimental value, but they don't realize that something that may not have voluminous or extensive monetary value now can be extremely valuable later on. And if you look at most Black artists, quite frankly, I want to risk, I'm not going to say all, but I'm going to say most of artists of color, you don't really see the growth in the value of their work until they pass away, because what happens is scarcity. The artist is no longer here, so you now have a limited amount of the artwork. So what are your thoughts on that concept, and what can you leave with those people who may have something that's sentimentally valued to them now, but ultimately no one knows what the value of it will be in the future? The journal, the book of poetry, the artwork, the whatever, the photographs, the whatever. What words would you have to share with them?
Live in the present, but protect in the future. And so I think that it makes a lot of sense to, first of all, be aware of your inventory. It's hard to think about this in a really broad sense because you might be thinking of all the things you've created in life, but consider what you have and what you would like to preserve. And I think of Prince, for instance. He was such an artist before his time, and his music was great when we first heard it, but it's really great
so
after.
Good.
It was great even when he was alive, 20 years later, And so I'm an artist too. I get it. But remember that you are not creating just for now. There are generations to come that can benefit from what you have. And so you really have to force yourself as a founder to be visionary and see the future. It may be a future you making up. It may be a future. It might be different next week. But you have to look into the future and consider this could be useful for someone later, and so I'll protect it for that sake. And here's the thing. There is an investment involved, and I understand that can be intimidating to people, but that's why we save. That's why we strategize. If you can't do it tomorrow, you could do it the day after. So if it's intimidating, don't stop. But there's something for you to protect because you have produced something. And also take pride in what you've done. You've received intelligence, I believe, from heaven, and you've been given the opportunity to do it on earth. Why not protect it? You could literally feed generations in the future based off of choices that you make now.
So that is our discussion, folks. Make sure that you protect your future unrealized wealth because you can feed future generations. So find my sister friend, Tiana Mann, attorney Tiana Mann at tianamann.com. That's TIANA, man with 2 N's.com, or on all socials at I am Tiana Mann. Thank you for joining me today.
Friend. I appreciate it.
Thank you. This is so exciting, and this is how we talk regularly. I know it may be boring to some, but we love it.
We just did it with salads. It was wonderful.
We love it. So we look forward to hearing from you next week on Our Legacy Matters show. Tune in every Tuesday at 11. Have a great week, everyone. The Our Legacy Matters show. Connect with me, Attorney Sherry Fleming, at I am Sherry Fleming on all social media platforms, or at sherryfleming.com/Our Legacy Matters, or you can call us at 410-316-6800. Make sure you tune in next week for another discussion because our legacy matters.
Talking the day, soul at night on the new 1010 WOLB.